I'm talking to Brandon Spikes, founder and CEO of Spikes Security. Welcome, Brandon.
Thanks, Richard.
Before we get into what Spikes Security does, fill us in on how you got to the point where you're launching Spikes Security and your experience with Elon Musk.
Yeah, nice. So, well, I'm an IT expert by trade, and I've grown up into my career through being sort of the equivalent of the mailroom in IT. You know, I did end user customer support and learned how to run server systems and learned how to build websites kind of before the web was really popular. And there was a internet startup that Elon started a long time ago called Zip2. It's a website, and they needed someone who could run their web servers. So I got introduced to him way back then, and you know, we kind of had some common interests. We both played some video games together, and through the years, as he started businesses, I found myself always sort of engaged, intrigued, and challenged by his next startup, and ended up working at virtually every company he's ever started. So that spans quite a lot of time, and so in that time, I elevated my career, and at one point, I found myself a C-level IT executive at SpaceX, and did some pretty awesome things along the way.
So how did that lead to discovering that there's a security problem that's not being addressed adequately?
Sure, yeah. Well, I think it was at PayPal was really the first time I was in charge of cybersecurity, and found that when I was at SpaceX, found out that the sort of typical way that hackers would break into the network shifted from direct attacks at our servers to fooling employees to click malicious links and sort of sneaking into networks that way. And when that happened, around, I think it was probably in 2008, Elon said he wanted to send astronauts into space. And I thought, that sounds really challenging, but really scary. If I know that there is malware on our network, how am I going to sleep at night? And so I immediately set about trying to solve sort of all of the ways that hackers might find their ways into SpaceX's network. And I think that, you know, they say that necessity is the mother of all invention. It's exactly what happened. You know, I needed to solve that problem, and spent a lot of time kind of thinking about a unique challenge, which was, how do I make it so that not only is you know, hackers and malware not getting into my network, but how do I make it so that the security that I provide is usable by rocket scientists? And if I were to characterize a rocket scientist, it is someone who is intelligent and entitled, and very difficult to really corral them and tell them what to do. So a solution that any kind of security solution that I invented had to be extremely easy to use, very fast, and essentially allow them to operate at maximum efficiency, yet somehow protect them at the same time. And the most challenging part of this was that, well, at SpaceX was different than at PayPal. The stuff that I was protecting was actually created by the employees, and it resided on their laptops or their devices. Whereas at PayPal, it sat on some back-end database. You know, it was much easier to secure that. But here we had a situation where you had to secure the information created by the employees, and in a way that was completely transparent to their workflow. So that's really the sort of the genesis behind Spike Security and the product that we've created to solve that kind of unique problem. And lo and behold, it turns out that's rather important for more than just SpaceX. And so, you know, I think that it creates an exciting scenario where the product that we've created that could be useful there could be useful everywhere.
So there's already a big industry of web content filtering to prevent people from going to the wrong places, and that kind of evolved into web security gateways that, you know, use signatures and, you know, packet inspection and executable inspection. Did you look at those and just discard them, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think we were pretty fortunate to have Elon Musk, who, you know, as we all know, is an amazing visionary entrepreneur, but to also have the financial support of his successes. So I often tell people, you know, we really, like, money was really no object when it came to cybersecurity. Job one when he hired me was don't let him hack into our network. Mm-hmm. So we had virtually every commercial solution that that was effective and affordable. But despite all of that, we had layered detection tools, heuristic detection, things that told us when unexpected network flows were occurring. We had secured all the common things, and found that detection really isn't the solution, right? If you're simply learning to respond more quickly and assuming that things are going to break in, I think that's a fundamentally flawed approach. So I was seeking something that actually prevented the attacks as well. You have to have the detection, you have to have the remediation, the quick response time, the awareness of what's going on the network, but you also have to put a stop to the threats that come in. And yeah, I mean, I think that's the big sort of challenge. I think I often put most security products in this sort of two different kind of categories. You've got those that prevent attacks and those that don't prevent attacks. And I think most of them don't.
Mm-hmm. So walk us through how Spike Security Solutions work.
Okay, sure. So we come at the problem from a fundamental principle that web browsers are malware. And so if you come to that conclusion, you realize there's a problem. We're all running malware on our computers. So the idea is, let's not put browsers on the computers anymore. Let's run browsers in a safe environment. So we created the safest possible environment for running a browser, which today means a hardened Linux operating system that's really not doing any other tasks, so it's single purpose. And we execute that browser process off of your endpoint device. So if you're browsing the web with our technology, you're actually looking at a representation of a browser rather than running the browser yourself. And what that creates is an opportunity to let this hardened Linux environment take on the burden of executing these potentially malicious websites on your behalf. They sort of interact with the web code, run it, execute it, build this web page and this experience as intended by the web authors. But then what is sent to the endpoint is transformed into a sort of very benign representation of that page that cannot carry malicious payloads with it. And the communication between the endpoint and that secure environment, we've gone to great lengths to make it as secure as possible, sort of reduce the attack surface to something that's microscopic and wrap it in encryption and sort of ensure the performance is there and that the ease of use is maximized and so on and so forth. But yeah, I think that's kind of a good...
Yeah. So in implementation, an enterprise would have an appliance on the outside of their firewall or DMZ.
Yep, or multiple appliances.
In a client of some sort that runs the representation of whatever web viewing they're doing, and then the people connect to the appliance connects to the outside world, and each session is a separate container.
Yeah, that's a good point. The appliance is creating containers for every unique pair of user and device. So if you have a laptop, a desktop, a phone, or something, each of those pairs is going to get its own container. And what's nice about that is that each container can then be tailored to that device and to that user. That provides full isolation for and between every user and every device pair.
Is there any advantages to, do you actually speed up the experience of the user?
Yeah, we don't have enough time to talk about the performance issues that we've solved, but I'll summarize it. So we've essentially changed the way the browser works and the way you interact with web pages. So the way we measure performance must change as well. The end result is actually quite a bit faster to use our technology. Pages load faster, you get through the content quicker. However, the same measurements that you might use to measure performance of a local browser, it's hard to apply them in this scenario because the actual browser process is running remotely, so certain elements of interacting with it are going to incur some delay, as any kind of remote session might. But by virtue of it running in a purpose-built and accelerated server environment, the pages actually run a lot faster, and the experience is more normalized and usually works as intended by the web author. And there's another element of this as well, which is mobile devices, or devices that are perhaps not very powerful, gain the immense power of a fully featured server browser instance. So you can get on a mobile device or on a small screen or on an inefficient computer, you can get an amazing web experience.
So I can see that being a huge advantage, knowing as I'm somebody who might have 70 tabs open, and
Yep.
I've just used up 107% of my memory, and things just stop working.
Yeah, I mean, that's
So you
what
don't have
happens.
that.
If you run a browser out of memory, your computer essentially stops working.
Yeah.
And so, certainly there's some advantages for this kind of solution.
So how does it scale?
Yeah, actually, rather linearly. You can simply add more server resources as needed, but it scales quite well. At the end of the day, you've got a server that's has a certain pool of resources, and different web pages use different amounts of those resources. So it kind of depends where are you going. From perhaps a worst case might be if your entire staff was going to some JavaScript load testing site that did nothing but use resources by its very design. You might get somewhere in the dozens of sessions per server. Conversely, if all of the people on the system are interacting with a very simple, perhaps basic forms-based website with very little dynamic content, you're looking at hundreds and hundreds of sessions per server. So part of our sales process is really to sort of educate and help our customers understand their typical usage and determine the kind of amount of resources they should plan to need for that. But I guess a good sort of rule of thumb is I usually tell people they're going to get about 100 users on a basic server with our technology. So you can get pretty dense and put lots of server units in racks, and a big enterprise would just load a bunch of appliances in a rack or put a bunch of hardware behind it, and they could easily handle all their users.
It's interesting to think about the fact that if you've made browsing safe, that really impacts a lot of the other things people have been spending on.
Yep.
So it might be a lot less constantly berating users not to click on things.
Yeah.
And a lot less need for these sandboxes that are going to detonate the downloadables before they let you look at them.
Certainly.
Because you're just not going to get them.
Yeah, and I think it makes the job more interesting. As a guy who used to be in charge of cybersecurity, man, we devoted a lot of resources to wiping computers that get infected, and all of the sort of janitorial tasks of detecting and fixing web malware. So, imagine if that goes away, then now what are your security professionals working on? And I would argue it is things that are much more strategically important and interesting and challenging. So I think that's maybe what gets me the most excited about it from that angle.
In preventative systems that just work, I've run into a very strange objection in that they're not instrumented to give me the forensics that I'm used to, because I've been, a lot of security departments just building more and more forensics so they can feed it into whatever analysis tool. And all of a sudden you're blocking things and they're no longer having an impact, and you've lost data and your reports look thinner than they used to be. Are you finding that?
The forensic thing is interesting to me. What we've found is that we have not found a website yet maliciously crafted enough to get through the security of our system. But we have instrumented it in such a way that when that occurs, we can take that information and consider it very valuable and sort of save it, store it, and go look at it later and kind of inspect it and see, how did this happen? I imagine that it's not impossible to break into the most secure Linux operating system. But if you did achieve that, it means you're pretty darn determined. And so I think there's immense value to forensically analyzing that event when it happens.
Mm-hmm. So how's customer acquisition going on?
Oh, it's exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I do feel like this is maybe a little too good to be true, but I suppose it shouldn't come as a surprise that if you sell a way to use the web without fear of getting hacked, there will be a lot of people buying it.
Yep.
And there's probably too many people interested in it. So we've been very careful to sort of pick the right customers, the ones that allow us to grow in the right way. But it's all across it's the whole gamut. I mean, we've been able to find customers interested in finance, entertainment, law enforcement. Just off the top of my head, I mean, it's been very, I guess you could say, horizontal.
Mm-hmm. I can't imagine anyone saying, "Nah, we don't want to look
Right?
at that."
Yeah.
It's going to be so easy to test in any environment.
Yeah.
So, all right, you got a product, you're going to market. What's next?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you
scaling up,
exactly what's next. So, today I sell something that makes the web secure, and it's the first and foremost thing we talk about is great security, great security. What's next for us is the day when that's not the thing I'm really talking about most. When I can say, here's a better web experience that's faster, more convenient, more transparent. Oh, and by the way, you can't get hacked while you're using it.
Mm-hmm.
That's what's next, is build that.
So where are you in the stage of developing the channel? Are you still direct sales?
Oh, yeah. It's I think a very traditional enterprise sales model. One that I've personally been on the customer end of for over 10 years, and so I'm very comfortable with it. But it's certainly that's not the only way for us forward. I think by traditional enterprise model, I mean that there are resellers and value-added resellers, and there's a typical distribution and reseller sort of model. We do a little bit of direct sales as well. I think it's a pretty common thing to see that. But I'm also interested in the sort of uncommon sales models, where perhaps people could self-select. I think that the modern customer is very good at educating themselves, and so one of my goals is to put all of the information on our website so that if someone's interested, they can easily make a purchase decision right then and there. And I also believe a lot in instant gratification. So I think you can imagine that one of my goals is to really let even a Fortune 500 CIO or CSO to go to our website and download it instantly, and perhaps even implement it instantly on their network. That's
now I can see
goal.
where Elon Musk has rubbed off on you.
Yeah,
because that's disruptive.
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
Great, Brandon. Thank you for introducing us to Spike Security, and I look forward to hearing what you're going to do next.
Yeah, you're welcome, Richard. Great time.